give it like a minute or two.
I didn't know where the keyboard was.
It's down there.
Are you doing ads?
No. I gave it a minute. Just like
No. I was looking at the webcam ad overlay.
Good.
Yeah.
They can hear us, so the
I
jig
can
is up.
I can see that.
Alright, so I guess we'll get this party started. Erica, can you go over to the streaming software? Like, just click inside. Thank you.
Yep.
One moment, folks. It didn't work.
Oh. Is your keyboard not working?
It's fine. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to my Ugly Little Things release party. As you can see, if you've ever watched one of these things before, I've got a little different setup right now. I tried to make it a little bit more festive with the assistance of my lovely wife, who has refused to appear on camera tonight because she's not wearing any makeup. She just gave me the finger. She is, however, going to be assisting me with the chat-related duties. So any questions you guys have, she will be relaying those to me since I'm obviously not at my computer. So, before I get started, my name is Todd Kiesling. I probably should have mentioned that. So I wrote a book. It's called Ugly Little Things, and if you're watching, I hope that's why you're here. Unless you're a creepy stalker person, that's cool too. But this just came out. It's available right now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can buy this. I think the discount is still effective. If you get the print edition, it's 20% off right now. The ebook copy is, I think, discounted to $2.99 currently. So if you haven't purchased this book, you should really get on that. Please. You see, this is where I start like stammering and saying and but and that sort of stuff. So I did give myself some notes so I wouldn't screw up too badly. And I have a list of people I'd like to thank for making this possible. I thanked them earlier today, but I'm also going to thank them now because, honestly, if it weren't for these people, this book wouldn't exist right now. I mean, yeah, in some degree it probably would have been written, but it would have been compiled. It certainly wouldn't have been published. So, a big shout out to the folks who I'm calling Team Kiesling. Joe, Italia, Amelia, Monique, Ben, Luke, Mercedes, Nev, and Aaron. Thank you guys so much for everything you've done. From the publicity to the publishing to the editing to just representation, business savvy, the design, the interior illustrations, everything that you guys have done to make this book a reality, I am forever indebted to you. Thank you very much. I love you all. You guys are awesome. So, with that said, I'll move into the story portion of the party in just a moment. I do also want to do a reminder that on the Facebook event page, there is a selfie contest going on. We are tracking those, or rather, my wife Erica is tracking those for me during the course of this broadcast. We will be choosing a winner at the end of the broadcast. There are 14 books up for grabs right now in one massive book package. One of them is a signed copy of Ugly Little Things. Another one is a signed copy. One moment. signed copy of John Paget's The Secret of Ventriloquism, which is an excellent collection that more people should be reading. I loved every story in this book. I happen to have an extra signed copy because John is awesome like that, and with his blessing, I am giving it away tonight as part of this package. Also, there are 12 ebooks. Keelan Patrick Burke's new novella, Blanky, is part of that giveaway. Chad Lusk, Mercedes M. Yardley, Anthony Rapino. Got a trilogy of novellas from Nikki Nelson Hicks. I know I'm forgetting some folks, and I apologize. Michelle Garza, Melissa Layson, the Sisters of Slaughter, their new one, Those Who Follow, is available. All these books are going to be in as part of this massive collection of, one big prize. So, all you got to do is buy my book, take a selfie of yourself, and use the hashtag ULT. We will be taking count. We're going to do a random selection at the end of the evening using random.org, and then we'll pick a winner, and the winner's going to get all that swag. It's going to be great. So, before I move on, I got to get serious for a second. And bear with me because this is kind of tough, but I feel like this is something that I need to do. About a couple of weeks ago, a close friend of mine by the name of Matt Mulgard passed away. He had a stroke, ended up in a coma, and did not come out of it. Matt was... he was a good guy. He was a friend of the horror community in general, and he gave me a lot of big breaks earlier in my career. And I wish he could be with us right now because I really wanted him to see this release. Because in a lot of ways, it was his encouragement and his faith in my writing ability that pushed me to do something like this. So, Matt, brother, we miss you. And wherever you are, I hope you're proud. So, and his mother, Vitina Mulgard, she goes by her husband's Facebook handle, Joseph Mulgard, on Facebook. I'm not sure if you're listening, but you're in my heart, and we love you very much. So, again, thank you for everything, Matt, and Vitina, for that matter. So with that said, if you'll bear with me a second, I need a drink of water. And then I am going to start reading my story, which is called Radio Free Nowhere. This story was chosen in a poll last week by you folks, as a matter of fact. I gave everybody choices of what they'd like for me to read and the time I think it'll take me to read them. And this is the winner. Radio Free Nowhere, a little bit of background. This was the first story I wrote that would eventually become this is, in my mind, the very first Ugly Little Thing. I wrote this back in 2013. It was first appeared as part of Exquisite Death, an audio anthology which was released by In-Ear Entertainment, and it's always got a special place in my heart because it was the first, essentially. So excuse me, I gotta make sure my my vocal chops are up to snuff here. Nice and nice and creepy. Nice and creepy. Yeah, creepy. I'm trying to get a reaction from my wife right now, and she's ignoring me. She's used to this. Okay, so this story is called Radio Free Nowhere. What about this one? Conrad paused the radio scan, settling on a country station. Ashley clenched her fingers around the steering wheel and shot him a quick scowl before returning her eyes to the highway. I didn't realize you had a death wish, Connie. He shook his head and held out his hands in defeat. Come on, Ash, you don't like top 40. You don't like country. You don't like classic rock. You're not leaving us much choice. Relax, she said, grinning. And that's not fair. I do like classic rock. Everybody likes classic rock. Yeah, but we're driving through radio-free nowhere right now. It's a goddamn dead zone. We'll be lucky to pick up anything between these mountains. He tapped his knuckle against the window. So if I've got to suffer through this shit, you should too. I'm not the one who forgot the iPod. He had a point, but she didn't think he had to know that. Truth was, she enjoyed driving in silence, listening to nothing but the hum of the engine and the tires on the road. They were 6 hours into their road trip, having just crossed over into West Virginia courtesy of I-68, and still had another 8 hours to go. She would have been content with spending the entire trip in silence if Connie would let her, but he insisted on making playlists for the drive. Playlists he wouldn't have a chance to broadcast. Her iPod was sitting at the back of a drawer in her bedroom. She knew this because she put it there. Connie was a sweet guy, and she cared about him, maybe even loved him, but let's not be hasty about things. And yet he had terrible taste in music. The country station's pop and twang gave way to static interjected with commentary from another station bleeding through the airwaves. She smirked. So much for that. That's enough out of you, smartass. Conrad seemed angry, but when she glanced to her right, she saw he was smiling, and she felt better about leaving the iPod. He twisted the radio dial. If only we had one of those satellite receivers. You know, she began, you could always try the AM band. Maybe listening to those holy rollers would do some good, you godless heathen. He put his hand on her thigh and gave her a light squeeze. A pleasant chill worked its way down the back of her leg. What, because we're living in sin, baby? If sleeping with you is wrong, then I don't want to be right. Send me to the lake of fire. At least I'll go with a big smile on my face. Ashley laughed, her cheeks flushed with a sudden heat. Eyes on the road, she told herself. She lifted Conrad's hand and put it back on his lap. Down, Tiger. Wait until we get to a hotel. You're no fun, lady. I'm plenty fun, and you know it. Why don't you check the GPS and find us a place to stop for the night? A smile slowly spread across Conrad's face. I like the way you think, he said. Conrad was still fiddling with the GPS when they pulled off the highway for gas an hour later. They drove for a few miles into the wilderness, following promises of a BP station back at the exit ramp. The gas station emerged before them like a petroleum oasis in a desert of trees, and when Ashley saw the gas pumps, she breathed a sigh of relief. The fuel gauge teetered on empty. Getting stranded out here was the last thing she wanted. Ashley parked alongside one of the pumps and shut off the car. She yawned and blinked away her fatigue, wondering how truckers managed to drive for such long hours. This damn thing. Still no luck? He shook his head. No, there's something wrong with it. Like it picks up a signal, but it won't give me directions to anywhere but the destination. Everything's locked out. Ashley took the device and pecked at the screen, but it remained frozen on the map, outlining their path in purple. Weird, she said, handing the GPS back to him. She opened the door and climbed out. Keep trying. You have better luck with gadgets than I do. No shit, he mumbled, tapping heavily at the screen. I don't need you to lose this too. I heard that. She was filling up the car when she heard the music. A gentle tune carried on the back of a soft breeze. The trees rustled, and her hair was blown back over her shoulders. That faint sound tickled her ears, a light melody hummed by a voice too far away to just be a whisper, and yet its singer could have been no further than a few feet away. Ashley turned, surveying the parking lot and expecting to see another car with its window down and radio on, but they were alone. The soft music lilted along the air for just a moment longer before the breeze died, its abrupt end accented by the loud clunk of the gas pump shutting off. She screwed on the gas cap and made her way into the station. "Evening, miss." The attendant tipped his hat and leered at her. He was middle-aged by the look of him, with a patch of silver stubble covering up dry, leathery skin. "Pump 2, she said, placing 2 bills on the counter. When the attendant turned toward the register, she noticed a yellow earplug stuffed into his ear. "Here's your change, miss, and a little something else, too." He slid a few singles and a packet of earplugs toward her. She looked at him for a moment, unsure of what to say. "Go on," he said. "Take 'em, on the house. You ain't from around these parts, so it's best you wear 'em." "I don't—" That faint music rose up in the station, bursting out of the speakers with a hiss of static. She could hear the music more clearly this time, its steady beat more pronounced with the old-time swagger of a piano tune and the achingly sweet voice of a woman singing in a language she'd never heard before. The leathery attendant nodded. "As I was saying, darling, you best put those in your ears. Some people go a little funny if they listen for too long." He twirled his index finger beside his ear. "That purty lady'll lead you places where you don't belong. There ain't no light down in that murk." But Ashley wasn't listening. She was too caught up in the sound, trying to decipher the beautiful language enunciated by its singer's silky voice. Outside, she could only hear a ghost of that melody, but in here the sound was given flesh, its tune agonizingly vivid. "Miss," she blinked, realizing for the first time that she was crying. The attendant only smiled at her and pointed to his earplugs. "As I was saying, you'd do best to put 'em in." "But why? It's beautiful, it's—" The attendant shrugged, suddenly dejected by her inquiry. He snatched the earplugs off the counter. "Suit yourself. Take your change, lady. And don't say I didn't warn you. I hear the water's quite fine this time of year anyways." Ashley scooped up her change and shoved it into her pocket. She left the station in a daze, carrying that haunting melody in her head while trying to work out the singer's puzzling language. Conrad set down the GPS when she climbed back into the car. "Damn thing's busted," he said. "Fucking Garmin. I tried every—" "Hey, are you all right?" She looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean? You're pale and—" He leaned over, frowning. "Honey, you're crying. What happened in there? Did someone say something to you?" Ashley shook her head. "No, Connie." She put her hand on his cheek and smiled. "I just heard a beautiful song, that's all. I'll try to find it on the radio. I want you to hear it." Conrad gave her a hard stare while chewing his bottom lip. "You're sure nothing's wrong?" "I'm sure. Let's go find us a place to stop for the night." They followed the road back through the forest and found the highway once more. Conrad kept toying with the GPS, too focused on the device's stubbornness to notice Ashley's preoccupation with the radio. She twisted the dial, searching the stations, looking for that wonderful song. 30 miles after leaving the gas station, she set the radio to scan and left it there, humming what she could recall of the tune while the evening sun extinguished itself behind the mountains. They were on the road for more than an hour without seeing a sign for a hotel, and aside from the occasional tractor-trailer, their car was the only one on the highway. Conrad stirred in his seat, snoring. Ashley leaned back and yawned. The GPS startled her with its chime, directing her to take the next exit ramp on the right. Ashley glanced down at the device, frowning at the purple line veering off into the cartographic wilderness. She was about to reach down and tap the screen when the radio locked onto a station, awash with interference. Static swarmed the car. "Turn that down," Conrad mumbled. Shaking, Ashley reached out to turn down the volume when— yes, the song. There it was again, clearer than it had been inside the gas station, rich with sound and full of even more instrumental accompaniment. And there, bellowing over that music, was that blessed singer's soulful voice, silky smooth and crooning unknown words that filled Ashley's heart to its brim. Tears clouded her vision, and she blinked them away just as the GPS chimed their turn-off. Ashley wiped the tears from her cheeks and flipped on her turn signal. She guided the car down the exit ramp, wondering only for a moment why the device was leading them off the highway before the song reached its crescendo, the singer belting out a cry that bordered on orgasmic. Ashley brought the car to a stop at the bottom of the ramp, sobbing into her hands as her heart continued to ache. The song slowed, fading off into white noise before beginning again, its lulling notes building up to that mysterious singer's first few bars. Ashley thought about waking Conrad so he could hear the song's beauty, but he was resting so peacefully in his seat, and why bother waking him? She knew he wouldn't appreciate that beautiful voice or the subtle nuances of the backing band. No, she would let him sleep and keep the secret of the siren's song to herself. The car's headlights pierced the shadows ahead, illuminating an empty 2-lane road that curled its way around a mountain. Ashley drove with the radio off and the window down. The static was distracting, and besides, she was so close to the source now she could hear the music in the wind. The song was louder, gaining volume as they snaked their way along the road's curves. Her heart thudded to the rhythm, and her chest swelled with each chorus, those strange words punctuating the cool night with a bittersweet warmth. Even the crickets were silent, allowing the siren to grace their stage. Ashley wondered what she was singing about. The GPS chimed once more for her to take a left at an upcoming junction, and a glance at the small screen revealed she would find out soon enough. Their destination was just a few miles away. She slowed the car and turned left down a gravel road, forging a path into the dark, filled to the brim with a dangerous sort of wonder. Every muscle ached and her head pounded, but oh God, did she need to get to the source of that beautiful voice. Nothing else mattered. The lake stretched out before them, its shores lined with the cars and trucks of other lucky listeners. The moon shimmered on those gentle waters, looking back at her like a single pale eye. "Come," it said. "Cleanse yourself, child. Baptize yourself with the siren's voice." Ashley parked the car and got out. She didn't bother closing the door, fearing the noise might wake Conrad. She glanced back at him, yearning for his touch, some part of her resisting the song that played overhead like the voice of God. She heard herself cry out, telling herself to wake up, but the song kept playing, and that singer's voice was so beautiful and serene. She turned toward the lake, slipped off her shoes, and waded into those murky waters. Conrad woke in the low light of dawn. He sat up, cringing at his stiff neck, and took a moment to get his bearings. Their car was parked between two old rusty trucks. Beyond was the shore of a lake, its body obscured by a hazy fog, and the sky was overcast. The driver door was open. "Ash?" He sat up and unbuckled his seatbelt. "Ashley? Where the hell are we?" He became aware of a low, subtle drone permeating the air. The noise made his head hurt. He turned, surveying the shore of the lake. Hundreds of cars were parked along the water, some old, some new. All were abandoned. "Ashley?" His voice echoed across the water, accompanied by the slow lapping of the waves. "This isn't funny. What are we doing in this place?" "Beautiful, isn't it?" He turned toward her voice, and when he saw her, his stomach tumbled to the ground. Ashley emerged from the lake. She was naked, except for strands of a black sludge that wrapped around her arms, between her breasts, and curled down between her legs. Open sores dotted her forehead, and when she smiled at him, one of her incisors dropped to the dirt. Conrad's gut lurched again, and he was torn between running to her and running away from her. What happened? What did you do?" "The siren told me you wouldn't hear it," she said, lurching forward with one bloated hand stretched out to him. "You always had bad taste in music, Connie, but that's okay. We forgive you." Dark hands emerged from the water, groping the air, clenching, eager for something to grip. Conrad reached out and took her hand. "We have to get you to a hospital." He was crying now, unable to process what had happened. He was so lost in his sorrow that he didn't feel Ashley's hold on his arm. Not at first. He turned to her, recoiling as one of her eyes slipped from its socket. "I'd rather stay. Come take a dip with me," she said, tightening her grip. An army of bloated, darkened hands rose from the water, beckoning to them, and Conrad began to scream. Ashley smiled. "The water's fine this time of year." And that is the end of Radio Free Nowhere. Whew, it's hot as hell in here, guys. I'm sweating. That's not just nerves, it's really, really fucking hot right now. How's the chat looking right now?
Your chair's trying to kill me.
So, how long did that take to read? It's like, feels like it wasn't very long.
Took about 15 minutes.
15 minutes, is that it?
Not quite 20 yet.
Okay. Well, I will pose... What time is it? I'm going to pose a question then to the chat, because it's only 8:30. Would you guys like for me to read another one? What's it looking like?
Well, people are applauding and Nikki hates you.
Nikki hates me?
Apparently, so much.
Nikki always hates me.
I know.
But I love Nikki so much. Nikki, I love you. That's Nikki Nelson Hicks, everybody. You can win her book, the anthology of the first 3 Jake Ishtenhegi stories, the Accidental Detective series, as part of the Selfie Contest prize, which I hope you are all participating in, and I expect so because according to my phone, I've got 28 unread messages on Facebook, so I'm guessing that there are quite a few.
Everybody wants you to read something, and Amelia suggests that you read how Pardo and Kara met around.
That's what Amelia wants?
That's what Amelia wants.
Well, this isn't Amelia's party.
Also, earlier in the U.S. said hi, but
Hi.
you were reading.
For those of you who are watching this either right now or later, Amelia is one of my editors, and Neva is her daughter. So hello, Neva. I love you, Amelia, but it's not your party. I think the runner-up in the poll was "Show Me Where the Waters Fill Your Grave."
Oh, I like that story.
So I think I'm gonna read that. So Radio Free Nowhere is an older story. Show Me Where the Waters Fill Your Grave is actually quite fitting right now, especially with all of the awful hurricane weather that's been happening down south. This was the last story I wrote for the collection before moving into the edits last year, and this was, oddly enough, written during hurricane season. And I had seen a news story about coffins that were floating down, flooded streets because where the hurricanes happened last year down south, they don't bury bodies very deep because of the water table. So this giant flood happens. You got coffins coming to this, to the surface, and they're just floating downstream. So that's where I kind of had the idea for this story, and it threw me for a loop. I did not expect it to go where it went, so I'll shut up and start reading, and hopefully my vocal cords don't give out, because I'm not used to doing this. Not yet, anyway. So, this story is called Show Me Where the Waters Fill Your Grave. The rains come again, and this time Jonathan is ready. He's spent weeks preparing for this moment, days and nights glued to the fancy thin television his son bought him last year for Christmas, endless hours watching the pretty young lady on the weather station. He's learned to tune out the commercials and advertisements. Though his body is withered and spent, Jonathan Crosby's mind is still sharp. He still has his wits, knows how to define right from wrong, and determine safety from danger. He's cognizant of his choices, and fully aware of their repercussions. So today, when the weather alert buzzes across the screen in a thick red band bisecting the pretty girl talking about the nonstop rains in the northeast, Jonathan doesn't pay attention. He doesn't have to. He knows he's in danger. The promise of doom and rainfall is what he's been waiting for all summer long. Last time the waters along the river rose high enough, he was still submerged in a different kind of mire. Glenda's passing had filled his head with the worst kind of depression, the sort that seeped down into the roots of the heart and stayed there. She'd been gone less than a week, and he'd spent the following days in a kind of stupor, wandering the rooms of their house, noting the lack of color, the absence of warmth. His joints sang together in a chorus of misery, a funerary ode to the moisture in the air. The rains had started the day after they buried her, and did not stop for a full week. Insult to injury, he supposed. When the world lost a soul like Glenda, he figured that shedding a few tears was to be expected. God knew he'd wept for days. Why shouldn't the world? Her absence had left an aching void in his life, an open wound of the spirit that would never truly heal, a wound that was always at risk of being pried open by the most innocent of queries from friends and strangers. "How are you today, John?" was the most common. Their neighbor, Sarah, was the most recent perpetrator of such an infraction. Of course, she was only making idle chatter. Of course, her heart was in the right place. But oh, the pain. How it seeped back into that wound, festering with a different kind of infection that would take weeks to cleanse. Sarah didn't know any better. She was half his age with a family of 4 to tend to, and wouldn't learn the agony of losing a spouse for some years yet. Lying to her was one of the hardest things he'd done that day, next to getting out of bed and wandering outside for the mail. Those early days, he kept to himself as much as possible, a heartbroken hermit locked away in a cave of perpetual melancholy. Although Glenda was entombed just a few miles down the road, their house had become her memorial, and he was its caretaker. He forced himself to pick up her routines, dusting the mantel and framed photos hung on the walls, feeding their pet guppies in the aquarium, and making the weekly grocery trip every Tuesday morning. A few weeks after the funeral, Sarah's husband, Donald, invited Jonathan over for dinner and beers. Jonathan acquiesced, mainly to stem the tide of their incessant requests, and over the course of the evening proceeded to drink a number of Donald's brews. By the time the sun had set, Jonathan was 2 sheets to the wind, as Glinda would say, and confessed to Donald that he was biding his time. "For what?" Donald asked. "For the rains," Jonathan slurred. "Ain't you ever heard that old saying?" Donald shook his head and finished off his beer. He crinkled the can in his fist. "What saying's that, John?" "Sorry, Don, I forget you didn't grow up here." Jonathan sloshed the last gulp of beer in the can, made it take that last drink, and then thought better of it. "This whole area is in a floodplain. When I was just a boy, the gang down at Miller's Bar, where my daddy used to while away his evenings, they'd always joke around with me and say that you know it's raining rough when your grandma comes to visit." "It's kind of grim for a joke, ain't it?" Jonathan shook his head. "Those were different times. We weren't as sensitive to things then. Anyways, the first time I heard it, I asked my daddy what it meant. He told me that the flood of '09 caused all the coffins to rise. Took 'em weeks to round up and sort out all the caskets." Donald uttered a low chuckle that gave way to a belch. He excused himself and frowned as he put the pieces together. "So when you say you're waiting for the rains—" "Oh, shit, John, I'm sorry." "No need for that, Don. It's just the beer talking." But it wasn't. Jonathan thought it was, but when the rains came again, they made a liar out of him. To tell the truth, Jonathan hadn't given much thought to that old joke in decades, not until the storms that followed Glinda's funeral. He was standing on his back porch and watching the world fall down in thick white sheets when the warning buzzed across his TV. The steady drum of raindrops on the porch roof masked the harsh buzz, and Jonathan almost didn't hear it. When he turned back and looked through the window at the red band on the screen, he sighed and shook his head. After 4 days of rain, the weather station's announcement was obvious. Water levels were rising. He closed his eyes and listened to the rapid beat of rain overhead. God's playing the drums again. Glinda always said that. Now that she was gone, he'd grown conscious of the way her words haunted his lexicon. She was a part of him even in speech, living on as a linguistic phantom that could not be exorcised. Not that he wanted her to be. Painful though it was, Jonathan took comfort in knowing she was still there somewhere, living on in his words. He need only speak to bring her back to him, if only for a fleeting moment. "God's playing drums again," he whispered. "Signaling your arrival to his kingdom, darling. I hope you're having a hell of a party." He wondered if that was true. Sure, he was raised in church, but in his adult years he'd wandered off the path. All that fire and brimstone didn't suit him. There was enough of it on the nightly news, and besides, he'd rather enjoy his time instead of dwelling on his transgressions. He and Glinda saw eye to eye on that matter, so they'd lived their lives the best they could. Now, though, Jonathan's imagination ran wild with possibilities. Was she watching him from heaven? Was she really up there, sitting on a cloud and laughing at every little thing he did while he waited his turn to shuffle off this coil? A slow, cold sensation slithered into his gut, carrying with it an alternate thought. What if she isn't up there? He wondered. What if she isn't anywhere? What if she's just gone? What if... Stop it, he told himself. Truth was, he had no way of knowing, and he was better off not dwelling on it. Easier said than done, maybe, but he didn't have much of a choice but to try. He locked away those troubling thoughts and leaned forward against the porch railing, watching the churning waters of the river slowly surge and creep over their banks. Most folks would have found the rising waters to be cause for concern, but not Jonathan. He and Glinda had lived in their home for over 30 years before she passed, and not once in that time had the waters ever reached their foundation. The rising tide would break at the foot of his driveway, just like it had all the other years. He watched until late evening, when, in the failing light, he saw the river had crept high enough over the bank to kiss the edge of the road. By that point, the winds had picked up, slapping the branches from one of Glinda's dogwoods against the siding and reminding him that they needed trimming. He'd forgotten to do that this year, preoccupied with his wife's illness. It'll keep until the storm passes, he thought, listening to the steady clap of limbs and pitter-patter of rain. Maybe tomorrow, a couple days at most. His vigil concluded. Jonathan turned away from the porch railing and retreated into his house. Satisfied, his joints aching from the damp air, Jonathan curled up on the sofa and took his evening deluge of prescription pills. Cholesterol, arthritis, one for inflammation, one for pain, thyroid, and the latest to join an all-star cast, anxiety. He'd kept this last one a secret from Glinda in the final months of her life. She was already down on herself. He didn't want to burden her with his stress. Just something to take the edge off, he'd told his doctor, until this ride is over. The ride had ended, but Jonathan was still hanging on. He liked being leveled out. The pills made the nights a bit easier to bear. He washed them down with a mug of cold coffee, lowered the volume on the TV, and wrapped one of Glinda's handmade blankets around him. He hadn't slept in their bed since she'd passed, couldn't bring himself to do so. Sleeping there seemed wrong somehow, as if the act might disturb some sacred oath he'd sealed with her in her passing, that if they could not lie there together in union, so shall the bed remain cold and empty, a monument to the time they spent together as husband and wife. And beneath that sense of marital duty, Jonathan supposed it just hurt too goddamn much. Another weather update buzzed from the television, but he didn't bother reading it. Instead, he reclined on the sofa, closed his eyes, and listened to God play drums. He waits at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in his Sunday best while reports of a perfect storm creep into the foyer. Seek higher ground, they say. If you need assistance... But Jonathan tunes out the meteorologist, focusing instead on his silver cufflinks. They're miniature books, a gift from Glinda on his 30th birthday. Because you love reading, she'd said, and because you lost your old pair. Jonathan traces his thumb across the smooth rectangle and smiles. The last time he wore them was at her funeral. The same as his suit, as a matter of fact, and for a moment, he wonders if his attire isn't appropriate for the occasion. After all, a three-piece suit and tie isn't practical when dealing with rising floodwaters. But he reminds himself that today is special. Concessions must be made in the face of extraordinary situations. Elsewhere, the pretty weather lady says to expect another surge of rainfall by noon, with no signs of slowing down by nightfall. He checks his watch. Jonathan smiles. Not long now. 3 slow knocks woke him from his sleep. The first knock was loud enough to rouse him from his slumber, a troubled sleep of dark dreams filled with lily pads and koi fish, and a cluster of small hands lurking beneath the surface. The second knock pulled him through the twilight veil of sleep into a world of consciousness. Jonathan opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. The room was filled with the bluish light of dawn, the sun just a promise beyond the horizon. Had he dreamed those 2 knocks? Could they have been the rain? He held his breath and waited, listening. The rain had stopped. The winds finally quieted, and the earth was still around him. Just a dream, he thought, and closed his eyes. The third knock came at last. Jonathan sat up, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and squinted at his watch. Not even 5 a.m. Who the hell could it be at this hour? He climbed to his feet, ignoring the fire in his joints and the urge to take his pills. They could wait. This stranger at the door, however, could not. Someone knocking on his door at this hour would have a good reason. They could be hurt. They might need help. As he stumbled across the living room to the foyer, his mind raced with possibilities of who it might be or what might be wrong. He thought of his neighbors, Sarah and Donald, and their 2 little ones. Had the waters risen too high in the night? His house's foundation sat at a slightly higher elevation. only by a few inches, but those inches could make all the difference in a flood. Jonathan resisted the urge to peek out the window. Instead, he twisted the deadbolt and opened the door. The floodwaters crested just beyond the edge of his driveway and were already receding, a dark, oily border illuminated in the dawn by a pale street light overhead. The water, however, was not what held his attention. The woman in his driveway wore a sapphire evening gown with jewels sewn into the trim. She shimmered when she moved, the jewels reflecting the light overhead, enhancing the curls of wet silvery hair draped over her shoulders. The hem of her gown fell at an angle just below her knees, revealing pale legs that had danced the nights away in their younger days. Her bare feet slapped across the water as she approached his doorstep. "I was wondering if you'd answer, love." Jonathan's knees gave out and he collapsed at the threshold. "Glenda?" Words failed him, their syllables like dry air through empty corn husks. "Why? How?" Glenda Crosby tiptoed along the pavement of their driveway. A slow trickle of water followed behind her, an inky black umbilicus stretching back to the ebbing tide below the drive. The longer he watched, the less Jonathan could tell which direction the water flowed. The dark stream followed her footsteps, surging forward in time to her movement, his queen marching along a wet carpet of foam and errant leaves caught in the tumult of the night's storm. He paused where the sidewalk met the driveway. The water stretched thin, barely more than a trickle at that distance. Her safety rope would let her go no farther. He would have to meet her halfway. Jonathan remained on his knees, befuddled by what he was seeing, his eyes encased in tears. How was this possible? How could she be standing here when she was buried over in Morningside? Was this a dream? A phantom? Any possible answers were swept away in the maelstrom raging within his head, his heart. "Don't weep, my darling." Now that she was closer, he could hear the lilt in her voice, a gentle rise in pitch that might accompany a tickle in one's throat, the sound of talking when water's gone down the wrong pipe. His mind flashed with the image of a gutter spout clogged with twigs and acorns, and he cleared his own throat instinctively. His mouth filled with phlegm, but he resisted the urge to spit it out. Grimacing, he swallowed back the filth. "Glenda," he said, finally, bracing himself against the door frame before climbing to his feet. His knees sang together in a chorus of damp agony. "This can't be. I watched the life go out of you. I watched them put you in the ground for Christ's sake." A smile spread across her damp, pale face. She held out her arms. "And yet here I am, my darling. Come to me." He took one step across the threshold onto the sidewalk, but couldn't bring himself to take another. "No," he reminded himself. "Everything is wrong about this. Glenda's dead and buried, John. She can't be here." She lowered her head and peered up at him. That look made his heart flutter. Her bedroom gaze. He'd teased her about it for years when they were still young and virile. Even after their son grew up and moved out, she still gave him the stare from time to time. "I'm yours," it told him, "and you're mine." Staring into her sapphire eyes, Jonathan felt compelled to join her. And why not? The one thing he desired most, to be with Glenda once again, had been granted to him. He'd won some sort of cosmic lottery, the recipient of gifted miracle of nature. His wife, once deceased, now stood mere feet away from him, awaiting his embrace. How he'd longed for her, to hear her voice again, to hold her hand. All the nights he'd slept without her, even before her passing, raced back to him in that moment. Every night without her touch was another quiet reassurance from reality, a coarse blanket pulled over him that was too scratchy, too short to truly bring him any comfort. He feared those nights would define the rest of his life. One lonely evening of depression would bleed into the next, counting down to the day that he, too, would wither and fade away into the great big nothing beyond. But now, somehow, beyond all hope and reason, here she was again, and she was waiting for him, beckoning for him, yearning. "Come to me," she said. "Dance with me one last time." And he wanted to. God, how he wanted to. His aching knees be damned. He took one step across the threshold, and then another. Glenda turned away and gazed up at the side of their home. She smiled faintly. "You forgot to trim the dogwood again, love." Jonathan choked back a humorless laugh. There was nothing funny about her statement. Quite the contrary, her words all but confirmed that what he saw before him was truly happening. Only Glenda would give him grief about those damn branches. His heart climbed into his throat. "Is it really you?" She looked back at him, reached out, and took his hand. Her skin was wet, cold, and touching her gave him goosebumps. "Dance with me," she whispered, and leaned in to kiss him. He's drifted off to sleep when Donald pounds on the door. The sound startles him so bad he bumps his head against the staircase banister. Dark, muted colors explode before his eyes as he clamors to regain his composure, pressing his hand against the back of his skull to dull the pain. "John? You in there, old man?" Old man. He hates when Donald calls him that, even if the name is apropos. Grimacing, with one hand clasped to his head, Jonathan staggers forward and opens the door. Donald peers up at him from beneath his poncho's hood. The rain's coming down so hard he can barely hear his neighbor's voice. "Didn't you hear the emergency siren? The whole neighborhood's being evacuated. We gotta go." Donald pauses, confused by the old man's attire, and for a moment there is a flash of understanding on his face. Jonathan can see the young man's epiphany through the downpour, tinged with a hint of sadness. He thinks I've gone senile. "Yeah, I heard it," Jonathan says. "You get your family out of here. I'm staying. Go on." He's about to close the door, but Donald holds out his hand to stop him, and for a moment Jonathan sees red. He sees himself slamming the door in his neighbor's face. He wants to growl and shout and tell Donald to mind his business, but the anger is displaced in an instant as the shrill horn of Donald's SUV tears through the storm. "Don't make me leave you here, John." Donald turns back and waves to his family in their vehicle. It's time to go. Past time, really. Jonathan can see the water is almost to the edge of his driveway. Just like last time, he thinks, and struggles to contain his smile. "You aren't leaving me. This is my choice, Donald. Go take care of your family. It's your duty." Jonathan makes to close the door, and this time Donald slams his palm against the barrier to stop him. "She isn't coming back, John. Your duty is to keep living, so help me." Donald doesn't finish his sentence. He's stunned into silence by the barrel of Jonathan's revolver, held a mere 6 inches from his face. Jonathan keeps his head, maintaining an even tone and a poker face to match. He clears his throat, licks his lips, and speaks steadily. "I know what my duty is, young man. Now I'm giving you until the count of 3 to get the fuck off my doorstep. 1, 2. He doesn't get to 3. Donald steps back with his hands held out. Either in defeat or confusion, Jonathan will never know. He opens his mouth to speak, but thinks better of it, offering Jonathan one more glance before turning away and sloshing back across the yard. Jonathan watches long enough to see Donald climb into his SUV and drive his family to safety. He places the revolver, a gift from his daddy many moons ago, back into his pocket and reminds himself to load it. Glancing up at the dark clouds overhead and the sheets of rain pouring down from them, Jonathan smiles. Soon now. Soon. He can do his duty too. Glenda led him down the driveway toward the waterline, her damp hands slick in his, their fingers entwined in a lover's knot. "Dance with me," she said again, and this time he didn't protest. He was so lost in her eyes and her leaking smile that he didn't notice when she stepped onto the surface of the churning waves. Sickly yellow foam collected around the tops of her pale feet as she walked, and Jonathan had taken 3 steps with her before he realized that he, too, was suspended above the surface. Another miracle, he thought dreamily, but the act of walking on water was nowhere near as fantastic as Glenda's reappearance. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Jonathan supposed this was a dream. This was the only way it all made sense. People didn't come back from the dead. Not since Jesus, by his count, had anyone truly come back from the dead. Glenda had been in the ground for 6 days at that point, twice as long as their Savior, and he suspected that if they were to walk the waters all the way to her grave, they would find the headstone undisturbed. Because this was a dream, he reasoned. Because this wasn't really happening. Glenda pirouetted on the water, her soaked dress flapping behind her like a limp tail. She came to rest before him and laughed. Water trickled down from the corners of her mouth. "Do you remember the steps? 1, 2, 3? He placed his hand on the small of her back and took her other hand in his. "I remember enough, I think." Years ago, in the months leading up to their wedding, Jonathan took a series of dancing classes with Glenda. He was never a fan of dancing, had never had the rhythm for it really, but Glenda insisted he learn the basics for their wedding. "I want to dance with my husband," she told him with her bedroom eyes, and how could he say no to that? He took those lessons and learned enough to get by, but he never did feel comfortable enough to say he enjoyed dancing. The night of their wedding, he stepped on her feet twice, but she just laughed at his embarrassment, slowly turning in time to Etta James singing "At Last." "I can't fault you," she later said, after they'd made love in their hotel room. "I've seen you try to drive a stick shift. You're not much better at that either." She was right. Jonathan never did have much rhythm, but after her passing he would have learned to tango if it meant being with her another day. Later, Jonathan supposed the miracle of her resurrection wasn't the only miracle God handed out that day. For the first time since their wedding night, Jonathan danced again. He only stepped on her feet once, but he didn't care and she didn't seem to mind. They had no audience in the dawn. There was only them and the flood, the detritus from the road and ditches, and a low breeze roiling the waters beyond the tree line. She led him in the dance, the water spilling over the feet. As they moved in counts of 3, Jonathan tried not to question the logic of walking on water. After all, he was dancing upon the surface with his deceased wife. Instead, he tried to enjoy the moment and privilege to be with her once again, no matter how fleeting it was. If he was meant to wake from this dream soon, then he would enjoy it for as long as he could, even if he knew the memories would haunt him for years to come. The worst dreams always did. They danced along the surface, first across the road to the river and then along the shoreline. Glenda kept time for them both, humming a tune he didn't recognize. Every now and then the air in her throat would catch, punctuating her song with a seeping gurgle of water and phlegm. Jonathan didn't mind the noise. He'd spent nearly a year listening to her hack up the remains of her lungs after the chemotherapy had done its damage. She was choked on the water, was all. Why wouldn't she be? Her grave was no doubt flooded. A low fog creeped along the surface of the water, silhouetted against fragments of morning light poking through the canopy of gray clouds. Those thin sunbeams fell upon both of them, and in that moment Jonathan saw the faint trickle of water dribbling from the corner of her lips down the side of her cheek. When she leaned in close to him to put her chin on his shoulder, he glimpsed something else slipping out of her mouth, a black, viscous sludge. Embalming fluid, maybe. He wasn't sure what else they pumped into her body at the mortuary, an assortment of chemicals for preservation, perhaps. Who was he to judge the finer intricacies of coming back to life? But something about that thick, licorice blackness made a part of him grow cold. Glenda sensed his unease, pulling back long enough to look him in the eye. Is something wrong, my darling? Nothing, dear. He looked away, already knowing that she knew better, but too ashamed to say anything on the contrary. Hold on to me. Don't ever let go. Glenda smiled, tightened her grip on him. Never. She leaned in, put her chin on his shoulder once more, and he felt himself go 10 degrees colder. The whole world around them had dropped in temperature. Jonathan peered out over the surface of the river at the roiling fog bank. Glenda was leading them right for it. Later, after he'd collapsed on the doorstep of his home, Jonathan would recall that it was the fog that woke him from her spell and made him realize he wasn't dreaming. The cold moisture in the air made his knees scream. Until the drop in temperature, he hadn't noticed their stark agony. He'd been too lost in Glenda's emergence to think of much else. Now, though, the cold was what sobered him up, and he gasped at the sudden jolt of pain shooting down his legs. He was about to ask if they could stop and sit for a spell when Glenda spoke. "We're almost there, my darling. Not far now." "Where are we going?" he grimaced. "To my grave, where the waters are waiting." The mere thought of that empty hole in the ground made him shiver. His whole body quaked, and she squeezed closer to him, yet her body offered no warmth. She was soaked through to the bone, her pruning skin like congealing fat on an old hunk of meat left out to spoil. In a warmer climate, Jonathan was certain that flies would have accompanied their dark, impossible dance across the surface of the flooded river. Glenda, honey, I need to rest a moment. My knees, you know how bad they get." "Shh," she said. "I'm so cold there in the deep, my darling. When the waters fill my grave, I get so cold. Won't you keep me warm?" Her voice was almost apologetic, as if she could not help herself despite what came next. Jonathan turned for the shore and tried to pull away from her grip, but found he couldn't. Her pruned fingers clasped around him like handcuffs, and when he met her gaze again, her blue eyes did not greet him. Black slime leaked from her sockets, mingling with a twin stream gushing out her nose. The skin around her face sagged, and for one horrifying moment, Jonathan realized that this thing was wearing his darling Glenda's face as a mask. He screamed, a hoarse cry for help that sounded too thin, too distant for anyone to hear. The cold fog inched closer, threatening to envelop them. Jonathan pulled once more, resisting his late wife's grip. "Keep us warm in the deep," the Glenda thing gurgled at him. Flecks of that blackened ichor spotted his cheeks. Jonathan struggled to find his footing and brace himself against her, only to find that he had no footing to gain. He was slowly sinking into the depths of the river, the freezing waters thick, gelatinous, a sudden bog in the middle of a churning stream. "A sandbar," he thought. "Just get out of this mess, John, just—" He looked down. What he saw aged him by a decade, maybe more. His heart paused for a full beat before painfully chugging to catch up with itself. Hands. Dozens, no, hundreds of bloated hands reaching up from the depths of the river, their fingers entwined with the tendrils of the looming fog bank. They clamored for him, gripping his shoes, pulling at his pant legs, dragging him down to the dark depths of the flood waters, inch by cold, agonizing inch. He twisted around, back to the Glenda thing, to make a desperate plea for his life, and discovered that her form was collapsing into itself. Her face dripped like warm wax, slowly melting into a dark blob that sank into her torso. Within seconds, she was nothing more than a puddle of the black ooze, oily and dispersing into the roiling waters before him. "No!" he cried as the hands slowly pulled him down. "No, Glenda, no!" Jonathan struggled against them, fighting against the pain, singing in his knees to lift one leg, just one, just enough to break free. 1, 2, 3, he thought, only he heard Glenda's voice in his head. "You remember how to count, don't you, darling? Keep the rhythm. There's nothing to it." He leaned forward, clenched his teeth, and flailed his arms into the water, pulling himself against the current. Still the hands pulled, yanking and pinching at him, pulling at his groin, his thighs, seeking any piece of him that could be held, gripped and dragged down to them. For an instant he speculated what might be at the other end of those bloated limbs, but the impossible things that stretched out from his imagination made him go numb. Instead, he focused his efforts on freeing himself and swimming to safety. Jonathan slowly lifted one leg, crying out in pain as the tendons around his swollen knees flared and sang a tune. As he did, he pulled one arm toward him, then the other. He kicked his other leg, pushing off the cluster of hands beneath the surface. Still they gripped him, but less so, and slowly. 1, 2, 3. That's it, darling. Keep your rhythm. Moment by moment, Jonathan freed himself from their pull. One of his shoes came off in their grip. A disappointed sigh breathed across the water's surface. The hands pulled his second shoe free from his foot, and he shot forward into the current. A cold wave slapped his face, stealing his breath for a precious second. You're free, darling. Keep going. 1, 2, 3. Jonathan swam. He swam harder and faster than he'd ever done before, his weak knees be damned, his old heart racing so hard he feared he might die of an attack right there in the river. Wouldn't that be something, he thought, idly, to drown after all this? But no such thing happened that day. Jonathan reached the shore, collapsing at the foot of his flooded driveway in time to watch the sun break through the overcast sky. The fog on the river had dispersed by then, and though the temperature had risen a few steady degrees, he found he could not keep warm. Out there on the water, he glimpsed a cluster of darkened, bloated hands for just a moment before their fingers slipped slowly beneath the waves. Somewhere beneath the surface, he knew, Glenda was there. For the second time in his life he'd lost his wife, and when the realization struck him, Jonathan Crosby turned away from the river and sobbed. Jonathan waits at the foot of his stairs, ruminating on that bizarre morning after the flood 4 years ago. He runs his hand over the curves of the revolver. Every day since, he's watched the weather, waiting for the moment when the weather is right. Every night since, he's suffered from dreams of drowning, of Glenda returning to drag him down to the cold stillness of her grave. He can't bring himself to visit her anymore. The last time he went to the cemetery was after the flood to make sure she was still there and that her casket hadn't floated to the surface. It hadn't, of course. Deep down, he knew that thing that led him out to the water wasn't his wife, but the promise of her return. Oh, it's too much to bear now. He prefers not to dwell on such things. Instead, Jonathan passes his time watching the weather. He waits for a day, just like today, when the rains will not let up. He waits for the conditions to be right, and when the sky opens up to let loose the furies of heaven, he remains steadfast in his resolve. After he turns Donald away, the waters continue to rise, reaching record heights by mid-afternoon. He doesn't know what she really was, or why he was chosen to be her prey. He wonders if maybe there's more to that story his daddy told him about the flood of '09, but he will never know. Daddy's long gone, for decades now, and all that's left is speculation on Jonathan's part. So Jonathan waits. He sits at the foot of his stairs and watches the floodwaters rise high enough to trickle under the doorway. He looks at the revolver in his hand, runs his thumb along the length of the barrel, and wonders if she really was Glenda. And if she was, can he do what he needs to do? Can he do his duty and put his wife to rest? He waits, and the waters stream into his home. He waits. There's a knock at the door. 1, 2, 3. He smiles. The rains come again, and this time Jonathan is ready. And that was my story, Show Me Where the Waters Fill Your Grave. Ta-da! So, I hope those of you who are still watching and listening kind of caught the hand theme I have going, which is pretty much the only direction I gave Ben Baldwin when he came up with this. I said, just do something with hands. A lot of my stories have creepy hands, which probably says something about me. I don't know. I just disembodied hands reaching out from, unknown places really really creep me out. They also creep out my wife. So I'm just gonna stand there and do this at her for the rest of the evening. So yeah, what did you guys think? Did they like it? I can't tell. I can't see the screen.
It's a mystery. Just keep going. No.
It's a mystery?
Yes. No, they do. No, I meant you couldn't see. They did. Creepy hands.
Does Nikki still hate me?
No, she says that the cover is beautifully. Yes, she actually does. I missed that. Yeah.
So, before we jump into the Q&A, I actually have an announcement to make, really. And, holy shit, my phone's been blowing up.
Rita's here.
Rita's watching?
Rita's watching.
Rita, I love you.
Hi, Rita.
Friend of ours. So, I have an announcement, and I had to print this out so I don't screw up what I can and can't say. So, Italia, my agent, if you're watching, I literally copied and pasted what you told me to say. So, I've been sitting on this news for about a week, and it's been killing me, so I'm glad I can finally say something. So, this book that you are all here, we're gathered here tonight, about this book right here. I am excited, and I still can't, you can't get over this, because it's the reality of it hasn't hit me yet, because it's fucking insane. Basically, Ugly Little Things has been optioned to be part of an anthology TV series in development by a few known veterans of the horror world. I realize it's incredibly fucking vague, but I am not permitted to say anything else. Trust me, when I am, I will be screaming it from the rooftops, but all I could say right now is if this happens, it's going to be incredible. So that's my big announcement. That's a thing that may or may not happen. So, what's up?
No comments.
No comments?
Yeah. Oh, wait, no, now they go.
Well, there is a bit of a delay. Yeah.
There should not be a delay. Everyone, it's awesome, and Nikki's proud of you.
She hates me, but she's proud of me.
Yes, totally. She only hates the best, so that's good.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And RB Wood says that's amazing. Amelia says we knew you first.
Aww.
Christy, if I say your last name wrong, Lytle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's so awesome. Congrats. Nikki also says bastard. Rhea says congratulations, and that's amazing. It's also really hot in here.
I know it's really hot in here. I'm sorry. If I open the window, though, you're going to pick up all the traffic coming down the street. So we're sweltering right now, folks, but we're suffering through this for you because we love you. I love you. I don't know about Erica, but I love you guys.
I love you guys. Priscilla M says congrats. I missed Cal. Sorry. She says, dude, that's awesome.
How did you miss Cal?
Because
Everybody's
time. I'm going up.
She doesn't love you as much as I do, Cal.
That is not true.
So I am gonna sit on my stool because I'm an old man.
I'm gonna actually sit before just a second.
But I need you.
I can still see the screen. I just needed to get out there a second.
Okay. So, now is the part of the program where I take questions from you guys. So, if you have questions for me that do not involve the announcement I just made, because I literally cannot say anything else about it, so don't ask. Please ask away. I am at your whim.
I think he just says a stool.
God. Yep.
An old man and his stool.
Oh, okay. That was one of my cats. One of my billion cats.
There are no questions.
There are no questions yet.
Not
No
yet.
questions yet. Okay. Well, I mean, I could, wrap this up early, I guess, but I kind of don't want to. Because I've been waiting for this all day, guys.
He has.
Man.
Amelia says, "What's next?"
What's next? Well, I am, by my estimation, I think this could change like another week or so. I'm about 50% of the way through a new book. It is called Devil's Creek. I'm calling it a small town cosmic horror novel. About 80,000 words into it. I expect it to be around 150. It could be more. It's exactly what you think it is. It's a small town dynamic story with a lot of like cosmic horror undertones to it. Lovecraft in the South, maybe, but not really Lovecraft per se, more like my own spin on cosmic horror. What else can I say about it? It's about an urban legend from my hometown. I grew up in a small Kentucky town called Corbin. It sucks. It sucked growing up there. But there was this urban legend of this place called Devil's Creek. Outside of Corbin is this old Devil's Creek Road. And growing up, I always heard stories about this. There used to be a church out there that was desecrated and used for devil worship. And it burned down due to mysterious circumstances. Different versions of the story. Some people say that it was art, like it was accident, people were doing a ritual. Some people say that somebody was smoking and it caught fire from an ember. Other people say that some folks went out there and intentionally burned it down because of the devil worship that was happening there. So I took that premise and started writing a story, kind of put my own spin on it from the concept that it's, what if there really was some weird evil shit going on out at that church? What if there was, way more to it than what I grew up hearing? So that's what the book kind of the premise is about. There's a lot more to it than that. And I'm really excited about it. It's coming very easily, which is awesome because it'll officially be the longest thing I've ever written. And I'm just really enjoying where the story is taking me. So, hoping to have a draft of that ready for my agent by the end of the year. Maybe. We'll see.
Okay. I lost misplaced.
You lost it? Okay.
I lost my place. You answered part of DB Quick's question, which was the latest thing you were working on, but he also wants to know how I put up with you.
Who is this?
R.B. Wood.
Oh, that's Richard.
Yeah. He also wants to know how I put up with you,
What?
but we can skip that.
You want to skip that part?
Sure. Amelia wants to know if you can read a paragraph or two from Devil's Creek.
I'm probably not going to read from Devil's Creek tonight. I'd like to keep this Ugly Little Things focused. Also because it's a first draft. It could change between now and 2 years from now if it ever gets published. So no Devil's Creek tonight. Sorry, folks. Sorry, Amelia.
She also wants to know how you feel about the upcoming Stoker season.
How I feel about the upcoming Stoker season.
I'm trying to.
It's kind of hard to concentrate because I got a cat at my foot. What's up, buddy? I haven't paid enough attention to the fur babies today because I've been doing book stuff. Come here, buddy. I want you to meet the internet. Oh, he's walking away now. He's shy. So, question about the upcoming Stoker season. I think it's been a great year for horror. I know Bracken McLeod's new one, Come to Dust, came out a few months ago, which I haven't read yet. I'm drawing a blank now because you put me on the spot. I'm in the middle of reading The Twilight Pariah that just came out from Tor. It's by Jeffrey... I want to say Jeffrey Ford. Could be wrong. I apologize, Mr. Jeffrey, if you're watching and I got your last name wrong.
Priscilla M wants to know what visual artist motivates you, your own or others.
Visual artists? Wow, that's a good question. Do I have... There's an artist I befriended many years ago by the name of Ben Tolman. Not sure if I've got his book handy or not.
All my hard work.
I know. Anyway, Ben Tolman does these amazing pieces of art. Like he does the stippling or pointillism, depending on what you want to call it. Both are valid. He does just these huge drawings. I mean, we're talking giant canvases, and he does these incredibly detailed, very tiny figures. And yeah, I don't have it. Look him up. His name is Ben Tolman. It's Tolman. And there was a piece of artwork that he did many years ago called Cognitive Transformation that had it was like what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm trying to say?
I don't know what you're talking about. I know there was a butterfly in a head.
Yeah, it's called Cognitive Transformation. It's like the side view of a guy. The guy's been cut in half, so you can see all the stuff going on inside, and it's basically the origination of an idea. But it's all very literal in that the idea is being, is represented as a fetus. There's like machinery and all this really weird organic stuff going on, and it's a beautiful drawing. And that was part of the inspiration of a book that I wrote many years ago called Imagination, which will probably never see the light of day because it's over 10 years old at this point, and it was kind of my first experience writing a long novel, and Amelia hates it, so yeah, I would say Ben Tolman. Also, it's a good segue to talk about the artwork that Luke Spooner did. 1 second, guys, I'll show you. Those of you who haven't seen it, it's a little slideshow that'll show you the artwork that Luke did. If it ever starts cycling. There we go. So these are the illustrations that Luke Spooner did for my book. They are amazing. I love every single one of them. And was very fortunate to be able to work with him. I also got to work with him on a project earlier this year that I can't talk about yet because it's not ready yet. But there I am, stammering again. Yeah, but Luke Spooner's another awesome artist. And of course, there's Ben Baldwin for doing the amazing cover art for most of Crystal Lake's stuff, really. He was one of the requests I had when I first signed with Crystal Lake last year, or a couple of years ago, or whenever it was. I wanted a cover by Ben, and he came up with what he came up with is better than I ever imagined. So, very fortunate. I'll switch back over to the webcam now.
Mickey asks, how Lovecraftian is Devil's Creek?
How Lovecraftian is Devil's Creek? What would you say?
Very.
Very? It's very Lovecraftian, according to Erica, who has read every chapter of it so far. Because she's
awesome.
She's my first time reader for everything. Yeah, I really drawing from the roots of cosmic horror, but also kind of following in the footsteps of John Langan, who was very kind and gracious enough to read my book and give me a blurb for the cover. But also following in the footsteps of Laird Barron, whom I adore. And yeah, it's hard to say though. It really is, because I can't explain the similarities without telling you what happens, and I'm not going to do that. So nice try, Nikki.
We'll just go with Barry. She also wants to know why you hate God.
Why do I? What?
We'll skip.
Why do I hate God? I'm not drunk enough for that conversation, first of all.
CT Andrea asks, can we see your cat? Unfortunately.
Can you try to wrangle one of the cats?
I can get a cat.
Okay, get one. We have 3 cats.
The only cat that's here doesn't like to be held.
Oh. We have 3 cats. One's a tuxedo. His name is Czar. He just ran away.
Yeah, he's not having it.
They all went downstairs. I'm sorry. One is a tuxedo named Czar. One is a ginger named Obi. And we have a Turkish Angora named Ophelia. They were all 3 here, and now they've all fucked off downstairs, so.
I heard them chattering, which is probably why Zara was up here.
They were wondering what we were doing. It's almost time for their treats, that's why they were up here.
Yeah. Richard asks if you're going to StokerCon in Rhode Island.
StokerCon is a maybe for me. I know it's kind of, we're getting kind of close. The only thing that concerns me about going to StokerCon is that time of year in New England, it can be pretty treacherous. Definitely by driving. First of all, driving would be out of the question, and flying, if I go, it would. Yeah, it's like the first weekend of March.
But we're having trouble here in March. I don't know if we can get
no,
out
I don't
of
know
here
if I'll
in
be able
March.
to actually even get out of my house at the beginning of March because of huge snowstorms. That said, NeCon is most definitely going to happen. I'm also going to try and go down to Scares That Care in Virginia, at least for a day, because Virginia's not that far for me. So those are my con plans, but StokerCon is still up in the air, so we'll see.
Oh, Nikki explained that in all of your stories you need to hate God. So.
Oh.
Maybe that was a
I can
serious
answer-
question. After all.
I can answer that question. So Nikki asked, why do I seem to hate God? Because it's an issue in a lot of my stories, so excuse me, I'm choked up. And I'm also sure my agent is like sitting there watching right now. Don't do this, don't. I'll keep it pretty simple. I grew up in a pretty, religious household, and I have my own viewpoints on it that probably fly in the face of a lot of mainstream views, and I'm not a fan of religion in general. So it's not that I hate God per se. It's more just that I, have an issue with the institutions. So I'll leave it at that. So thanks, Nikki, for putting me on the spot like that. Appreciate that, buddy.
Where do you hide all the bodies?
Where do I hide all the bodies? Well, I have a few of them hidden under my patio, which if Mercedes is watching, she knows about the patio. She's well acquainted with the patio. That's a long-running joke between her and I. The bodies are, kind of scattered here and there. I mean, the only way you'd find out is if you were to become one of them, which you don't want to happen, so...
Thermal Paper Videos commented that God created your beard, you asshole.
Who said that?
Thermal Paper Videos? I don't know.
Thermal Paper? I don't know who that is. Okay. Did he? Okay. It is pretty godlike, isn't it? My beard. Oh, we have a cat.
No, she's running away.
She's running away?
Yeah, she came and then she left. We don't have a cat. Sorry. I'm excited. No cats.
Ophelia.
Oh, Amelia says she has a theory about your God obsession, but you vehemently deny it.
Yeah, let's steer away from those kind of questions.
I'm just reading what's
I don't really want to talk about that. Different conversation. No alcohol is involved right now. I feel like I would need a couple of beers to really get into that, so. Czar?
Oh, a
Buddy?
cat that won't be on camera.
Here, buddy. I don't know if he'll let me pick him up because he's basically he's a big bag of needles. He's very dangerous when he's picked up. He's the only cat who doesn't really like to be held. Come here, buddy.
He won't even come in. He knows you want to pick him up.
Come on. There she is. There's the little girl. Okay. So this is Ophelia. Say hello. She's our youngest cat. We rescued her
From Kentucky.
from Kentucky, as a matter of fact. And now she's trying to escape. But you're not allowed to go. You're fluffy. Sorry, you're fluffy. You gotta pay the cuddle tax. Nope. Okay. So that's Ophelia. I doubt we'll get the two boys in here.
Andy Rawson asks if you have a favorite satanic chant. I'm not sure.
My favorite satanic chant.
That's followed up immediately by loving the cat, so. Kel says kitty.
What are you drinking there?
Spike seltzer.
Spiked seltzer.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had a cranberry one. Actually, Cal wants to know when we're coming to Maine so that we can stalk Stephen King together.
Well, I guess if in the summertime he'll be up there. I know he winters in Florida or whatever.
Summer is over.
Yeah.
I guess not technically.
When are we coming up to Maine? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, there are several people in Maine I'd like to see. Kel and your husband obviously being two of them. Soon, eventually.
We'd have to find a month and a half. It's not under snow.
Yeah, I know. Alright, get those questions coming, guys. Otherwise, it's just going to be a whole lot of me just sitting here doing this, rocking backwards, thinking nobody loves me. Nobody loves me.
Cal says she's the most important person you want to see.
Oh, obviously.
Maine,
I mean,
totally.
why else would I go to Maine? I mean, who gives a shit about Stephen King?
Yeah, and the scenery's not beautiful.
No, that's not true. I would get up to Maine and, basically become a huge fanboy and want to take, the Stephen King tour of Bangor.
And we leave with a restraining order.
Yeah, and leave with a restraining order. I don't know, I got to meet Joe. He was pretty nice. Met Joe Hill last year at Nikon. great guy, but I was a gibbering mess because I was a huge, had stars in my eyes. And Mr. Hill, would you please sign my books?
Amelia wants to know what your writing process is. Plotter or
pantser?
Yeah,
am I a plotter or what a pantser means is you write by the seat of your pants.
That's what I figured.
So plotter or pantser, I'm a little bit of both. I can't start a story until I know how it starts. I know how it's going to end, and I have a title. I don't really start any story until I have those three things. I've tried it without it. It doesn't work out very well. I kind of like to know where I'm going to begin, where I'm trying to get to. And for me, the title is basically more like a thematic compass, essentially. Kind of steers me in the right high points, what I want to say with the story. So, yeah, that's pretty much my process. Now, when it comes to the plotting aspect of it, when I get stuck at a certain point, sometimes I will try to plot out select scenes so that I can kind of stay on track, especially when I'm getting toward the end of either an end of a chapter or end of a sequence of chapters or end of a story entirely, whether it's a short story or book. For example, with Devil's Creek, I'm about 2 chapters away from wrapping up the third part of the book, so I have all of the scenes laid out for the next 2 chapters, so I can kind of stay on track of where I want to end up at the end of that part. But what comes next in the following part, I don't know. I'll make that up as I go. So I'm a bit of a, oddity when it comes to that sort of thing.
I mean, I also asked if you have any pre-writing rituals or other habits, saying that we all know that music is a big part of getting into the mood.
Yeah, music is definitely a huge part of my process. I really like to find music that fits the mood or the tone of what I'm working on. I, in recent years, have taken to curating large playlists on Spotify for that very purpose. And once I kind of have everything that really fits, I'll only listen to that playlist when I'm working on that story. And the idea is it's more like a meditative thing where, when I sit down and put on that music, I'm right in the zone for that tale that I'm trying to tell.
So that would be your pre-writing.
That would be my pre-writing process. I also pace a lot, which is kind of weird. I'll sometimes, I look like a crazy person. I'll be pacing back and forth. I'll be talking to myself. I'll be a million miles away. Erica will ask me questions. I won't hear her. I kind of go into a bit of a trance like that. It's really weird. But that's also what I've always done, and with any creative project. When before I got into writing, when I was still drawing, I was sifting through all the things in my head to try and make sense of it so that I can have a beginning, middle, and end for whatever it is I'm doing.
Nikki also joking last candles, incense, gel or mousse. And where's your beer? But this is actually kind of a not writing question, but still kind of cool.
Okay.
If you made a haunted house, what would be the scariest part?
A haunted house?
Yeah, I imagine
the scariest part.
Which is sort of like getting in your head for writing too. That's a
really easy one. I would have a haunted house that would have, really over the top effects. If a budget is not a constraint, if I have, free reign, as much money as possible, I'd have a haunted house that hits all of the high points, hits all of the tropes, and then at the very end there would be like a hallway or something that only one person could go down at a time before leaving. And at the very end of the hall, I would just have a mirror. And that would be it.
Anything else? What's your favorite writing, snack, and drink?
Favorite writing snack is easy. Any gummy anything. Gummy savers, gummy bears.
Fish.
Swedish fish. Gummy, like anything gummy. I'm a sucker for that stuff. Drink can be anything. I rarely drink booze when I'm writing. Sometimes I'll have a beer, but that's not often. I usually just stick with water or whatever we have in the house. Which is generally water. Like what I'm drinking right now. Man, you guys are blowing up my phone.
I have your conversations muted. Oh. Sorry, I have multiple duties here.
We're waiting for Erica to find your question. She's scrolling.
Oh no, I was also looking for selfies because I'm
looking for
flipping back
selfies,
and
okay.
forth between the two screens. Nikki did make the comment about gummy diarrhea, but generally that's only sugar-free gummies.
Yeah, Nikki, get it right.
Andy Ross asks, do you write on paper or on the computer?
Predominantly, I'll write on computer. It's just faster that way for me. I type like 1 million words a minute, and typing for me is the fastest way I can get what's up here onto, into Word. That being said, as a matter of fact, I'm knocking down all your chains.
It's fine. Just put them on the floor.
Gonna
There you go.
put them right here.
There you go.
So, I happen to have some handwritten stuff right here, as a matter of fact. I wrote most of my first novel, Life Transparent, on legal pads just like this. Mainly because when I wrote it, I was working at a law firm, and that place sucked, but I couldn't just sit at a computer and type all day, so I would take a legal pad and scribble down when I had a few minutes. So that's kind of how my first novel came to be. So it whether I write something by hand or not generally depends on how much trouble the story is giving me. It's kind of hard to quantify, but basically, for me anyway, what I write on a keyboard and what I write by hand have drastically different tones of voice. So if a story is giving me a hard time typing, I will try writing it on a piece of paper and see if maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm going at it the wrong way, and then after the fact I'll transcribe that back into Microsoft Word and go from there.
Okay, this question actually caused Amelia to realize who Thermal Paper Videos is. It says, I hear you've been encouraged to experiment with psychedelics. Why haven't you?
I know who that is. So I've been encouraged to experiment with psychedelics, and why haven't I? So Brian Brian Kirk, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't yet.
Okay.
Because now it makes sense for Erica. I haven't yet because that's illegal and wrong. Why would you ever do such a thing, Brian? Also, Brian, my mom is probably watching, so I would never, ever, ever do such a thing. How could you even ask me such a question like that?
And yes, why I have chains. Amelia said because I make gorgeous jewelry, but it's Halloween decorations.
They're Halloween decorations. We tried to dress this up a little bit.
It didn't work.
It didn't work out so well. I mean, I've got like a skeletal bird. I got a skeletal cat. I've got a skull. You
That
know, and
third's part of a murder. We just don't have it all up here.
Yeah, so didn't work out that well. We tried to get some creepy lighting, but it didn't look right. So we have chains. Hey, don't scratch my chair.
Why you bad?
This is one of the hazards of having cats and being a writer. They run in and just scratch the shit out of your chair all the time.
And everything else. Don't tempt her. I don't want her to
I'm
think
gonna
those are
make you
toys.
pay the cuddle tax again. What time is it anyway?
It is 9:45.
9:45. Okay, we should probably start wrapping this up.
Yeah.
Any more questions before we select a winner of our selfie contest? I'm trying to antagonize the white ball of fur sitting behind you.
You know that when I put those up as decorations, she's gonna think they're toys.
Probably.
Okay. Just so we're clear.
Any more questions, honey?
Nope.
Nope.
Not
No more
so far.
questions. All right.
Brian says to just do a monologue. Brian says to do a monologue.
Just do like a Jay Leno monologue.
Up here. Oh wait. Do you need those glasses, or do you just think they're cool?
Who the fuck asked that?
Andy Rosen.
Well, Andy, I actually do need these glasses. I have really bad astigmatism, so everything just kind of goes fuzzy without them. So this is me without glasses. Me with glasses. Was there a commentary? Were you gonna say something? Okay,
No,
you had this
I'm
look on your
flipping
face.
back and forth. Brian says to tell them the story about when he tried to break into your room at Nikon. When did it?
Oh,
Was that last year?
that was
wasn't
last
there?
year. He didn't try to break in. He's embellishing a little bit.
Okay.
So Nikon last year, I didn't have a roommate the first night. So we had all kind of congregated in my room. Brian's roommate brought a cooler full of beer, but he didn't know where his roommate was or something. I think it was John McElveen, actually. I don't remember the details because everything's a little fuzzy because there was a lot of drinking that first night. But at some point, I called it a night. It was probably around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had a panel the next, first thing in the morning, the following day. And at some point, I told Kirk to come back to my room for his beer or something. And I remember he was pounding on the door, and I'm half asleep. And I just rolled over and said, "Fuck it, I'll give him his beer in the morning."
His beer ended up in our room again.
His beer also ended up in my room again this year. At some point, I remember we had just gone to bed, as Erica was with me this year, and we heard Kirk. His room was across the hall from ours, and he knocked on the door of his room, and I just hear him say, "Hey, baby." Because he was, I'm sure, well inebriated at that point.
Nobody got drunk at Nikon.
Oh, that's right. What happened at Nikon stayed at Nikon. I'm sorry. I mean, we were all sober the entire time.
Absolutely. I have your winner.
You have my
I
winner.
have your winner because there's not been any new selfies in a while.
All right, hand me the... Folks, we have a winner of the selfie contest. Nice. I didn't see hers.
Yeah, it's here. Here.
1 second. Yay. Awesome.
Which she's showing both editions, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. enough sitting on the stool. My ass hurts. So we are going to announce the winner of the selfie contest now. RJ Keller, you have won the prize package of 14 books, including a signed paperback edition of Ugly Little Things Collected Horrors by yours truly, signed paperback edition of John Paget's excellent collection, The Secret of Ventriloquism, and 12 other ebooks, some of which you might already own, and you're free to re-gift those or hand those out. But I will have everyone get in touch with you to arrange sending you their offerings. So thanks for playing. Thanks everybody for posting your selfies. I appreciate it very much. I hope you all had fun. So I'm going to wrap this up because it's hot as hell in my office and I think I want ice cream. So
You have ice cream?
no, we don't have ice cream. I'm going to go get ice cream. So this is the perfect way to end a launch day is by getting ice cream. So, yeah. Thank you all so much for supporting the release of this book. It has been a long time coming. I feel like we've been working on this thing forever, and for it to actually be in my hands, out in the world, is incredible. It's an amazing feeling, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, for tuning in, watching, participating in the contest, sharing the posts, everything. You guys, it's awesome of you to do. So, again, my book is Ugly Little Things Collected Horrors. It is out in paperback and ebook right now. Please go buy it if you haven't already, and more importantly, please leave a review on Amazon. I can't stress that enough. Please leave a review on Amazon. Those reviews are a huge deal. Folks who are probably casual readers don't understand that, but the reviews will make or break a book, especially in its first, couple of weeks on sale. So if we can get as many reviews as possible, that would be wonderful. And that's about it. I'm Todd Kiesling. My website is toddkiesling.com. I'm on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. I'm on Instagram too for some weird ass reason. So thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you later. Thank you.